Hey, how's it going? Welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Jess, and today I'm going to be doing my July reading wrap-up. July was a very productive reading month because I was participating in Katie Colson's Sunrise on the Readathon, and I was reading a ton for that. So this month I read 8 books, which is very, very good for me. I normally read about 4 to 7 a month. This was definitely higher than usual, and these are not small books, a lot of these, except for the manga on the top. A couple of these are decoys, because one of them I read digitally and one of them I listened to as an audiobook and then purchased a physical copy after the fact. So I read 6 books physically, and then I had 1 audiobook and 1 ebook. I haven't added up the totals as of filming this, so I'll put them on the screen somewhere, but I read this many pages and I listened to this many hours of audiobooks. I'm going to approach this wrap-up the same way I did for last month's wrap-up, where I kind of film it in batches and talk about the books close to when I finished them. So I'm going to hand it back to Past Me, who's going to tell you about the first book that I read in July. The first book that I read in July is One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. I listened to this one as an audiobook and I got it from my library. This one is a sapphic romance where our main character August moves to New York City and starts taking the subway to her new job at a diner, and while taking the subway one day she meets this girl named Jane. Jane appears to be kind of a edgy punk rocker, but August quickly realizes that she's actually a softie with a heart of gold. They start to get to know each other and build a friendship when August realizes that this girl doesn't just seem like she's from the 1970s, she literally is from the 1970s. They have to work together to figure out why Jane is in a different time, how to get her back to her time, and also how to navigate these budding feelings that they have for each other along the way. I really loved this book, and I thought that the relationship between August and Jane felt really realistic. The way that they started to get to know each other through their conversations and building rapport with each other felt very real. And I loved seeing them interact with each other, the way that they would call each other different nicknames and banter with each other. And I loved seeing the whole progression of their romance. There's also a really great supporting cast of characters in this between August's roommates and her coworkers at the diner, as well as some other friends that she makes along the way, including a drag queen named Annie Depressant. I just really loved the found family elements of this and the way that it really highlights the importance of community, and I loved seeing how the different groups of friends that August has made help her and help Jane along the way in their journey. Community and belonging are such a huge theme in this, along with the concept of, your home being where your chosen people are and the way that you can build your own support system. And as for Jane, who's from the 1970s, it's really interesting to see her perspective of the modern day queer community and how it's different than her time. She kind of gets a glimpse at how the queer community has changed from her time to now, and how the work of previous generations and the fighting that they did got the community to where it is now, and how much things have changed since her time. This also gets a little bit into family estrangement and being disconnected from your family. Almost all the characters in this have some sort of conflict in their family or have experienced being estranged from their family, and how that's kind of influenced their other relationships with people and how they approach new relationships or building trust in somebody. This book is definitely very multifaceted, and all of the different emotional explorations that we get in it feel very realistic and grounded. I think a lot of people can relate to them, and I really loved seeing the way that the characters would grow individually, but also how they would help each other grow. I really loved the friendships in this. All of the roommates were really wonderful. The diner crew was really wonderful. It felt like they had a lot of natural rapport with each other, and it was really interesting seeing the way that the different groups would grow and interconnect, and how they were all there for each other and supporting each other throughout the story. I thought it was really wholesome, and I really came to love the cast of characters in this. I also love that there wasn't really a miscommunication trope in this. I feel like a lot of people, myself included, don't really love a miscommunication trope in a romance. I think it can be very frustrating and just feel like it's kind of stuck in there just to have a third act conflict in a lot of ways. And this still does have a third act conflict, don't get me wrong, but it felt like the conflict that was there felt very grounded in reality, and it made sense for the characters, and it made sense for where they were at in their personal journeys as well. It didn't leave me feeling like frustrated or confused about why they got to this point. I knew why they got to that point and it made sense for them. And of course, this is spoiler-free, so I'm not going to go into the ending or anything like that, although I may do a little spoiler section because I can't resist talking about some things. But of course, in avoiding spoilers, I can't say too much about the ending, but I was happy with the way that it ended, and I think it wrapped up nicely. I cried a lot in this book. I think that there were a couple sections throughout that had me tearing up, but there was a lot of stuff towards the end that made me cry as well. I'm going to do a little spoiler section here because I just want to talk about something. If you don't want to hear spoilers, I would skip ahead to the end of this spoiler section, and then I'll give my final thoughts for the book. Okay, but to get into spoiler talk now, I cried so much at the emotional climax of this story, and if you've read this, then you know towards the end they're trying to do this kind of subway station electric heist thing to try to send enough electricity into the line that it'll like zap Jane back to her time. And they're doing this whole charity party for Billy's Pancake House as well, because the diner is in trouble and they're trying to raise money for it, and the whole community came out and there was a drag show. A lot of emotional moments between some of the side characters, like confessing their love for each other or things like that. All of that had me like primed and already in a very emotional state. And then they were about to do the electrical thing, and then August is sitting on the platform and Jane is standing on the rail, and August is thinking to herself she can't decide if she wants to tell Jane that she's in love with her or not, because if they never see each other again, if Jane does go back to her time, that's going to be devastating, having confessed her love and then they're gone. But she's also thinking, if I don't tell her now, I'm never going to have another chance to, and can I live with that regret of never saying it? And so she ends up telling Jane. She has this whole confession, and Jane says it back and has this whole emotional moment, and it's so sweet. It was so sweet, and I was already in tears about all of this because it was so romantic. And then they do the electric zap, and then it doesn't work. It doesn't send Jane back to her time, and so they're just standing there in limbo because they don't know what to do. And then August is like, oh, but our whole connection and the whole reason that you've been kept in this timeline is because of us, and when we kiss, it makes like the electricity of the line go crazy or whatever, so maybe we should kiss. But Jane doesn't want to kiss August because if she does, it could zap August and kill her because of the electricity on the line. But August is like, fuck it. And so she kisses Jane, but then everything goes black and she wakes up in her apartment and she asks her roommate, like, what happened? You know, did it work? And she realizes that it seemingly did work and that Jane got sent back to her time, and then it's devastating. And so she's just detached from her life and depressed, and then there's all these other family factors going on as well. And so I was just feeling so miserable for August and for Jane. And then at the end, somehow Jane is back, and to her, no time had passed at all, but to August, it had been like 3 months. And so there had been this weird like lapse in time for the two of them, but it doesn't matter because Jane's here, and so they get a happily ever after, and I was so happy for that. I just really loved these characters in the story, and I'm so happy that they got to be together at the end. And even though it like doesn't really make a whole lot of sense logistically, you gotta suspend disbelief because it's, you know, magical realism basically. But anyway, yeah, I was just really happy that they got a happy ending and that they got to be together. So that's the end of the spoilers now. Alright, so spoilers are over now, and just to wrap up my thoughts on this, obviously I loved it. It's probably one of my favorite books of the year now, and as you probably guessed, I'm gonna give it a 5 stars. I loved this book. It was so wonderful, and I listened to it on audio, which I really suggest doing. I think the audiobook was really well done. And actually, fun fact, it was the same narrator that did the Bat Eater audiobook I listened to last month. So I think that's kind of a nice coincidence, and it's funny that both of them ended up being 5-star books for me. Time for a group hydrate, drink your water. The next book that I finished for July is Don't Let the Forest In by C.G. Drews. Don't Let the Forest In is a fantasy horror book that follows 2 boys as they are attending this boarding school. One of the boys, named Andrew, writes these really grim fairy tale short stories, and the other one, Thomas, is an artist. Andrew and Thomas have been friends for years, along with Andrew's twin sister, Dove. They kind of have this little trifecta group going on, but also Andrew is deeply in love with Thomas and hasn't told him how he feels. You also figure out pretty quickly that both of these boys have very dark, twisted minds, and that they come up with the most terrifying stories. Andrew writes them, and then Thomas will draw them and bring them to life in more ways than one. Really strange, dark things start happening at the school, and Andrew has this constant feeling of being haunted. And so one night he goes out to the forest that's near the boarding school, which happens to be one of Thomas's favorite places. And he finds Thomas fighting this nightmarish creature that is literally one of Thomas's drawings brought to life. Right away, this book has a really dark, foreboding tone to it, and it establishes this level of tension right away. This story was just so dark and twisty and creepy, and it had me on the edge of my seat the entire time I was reading it. I ended up reading this in just 2 sittings because I was so invested and so immersed in it. And it really had this tone of a grim fairy tale as well, like the kind that Andrew writes. It was so lyrical while also being so uncomfortable, and the level of tension all throughout was very good. A lot of the tabs in this were just moments where I found the atmosphere to be so enthralling, and I was so immersed in this dark, decaying autumn feeling. This really feels like a late autumn read because it has such strong imagery of rot and moss and thorns, decaying leaves and dark forests and ominous nights, and these creepy illustrations all throughout that really create such a haunting, thrilling atmosphere that you constantly want to know what's going to happen next. I don't want to show you any of the illustrations because it's part of the reveals of the creatures throughout. I really love the illustrations in this and how they contribute to the story, and I wish that there were more of them, to be honest. If you haven't read this, I would recommend waiting until like October or November to read it. Obviously, you can read spooky books all year, but I think the atmosphere in this feels like a November kind of book. This also felt kind of reminiscent of another book that I read called House of Hollow. I don't remember who the author is, but I'll put the photo on this side. I think both of them do a really good job at creating this ambiance and tone that really suits the storytelling. If you have read House of Hollow and you loved it, I think you would probably really love this one too. And if you have read this one but haven't read House of Hollow, I would recommend reading that one too. I think they both kind of belong together in a way. Also, the writing in this, in regards to the romance, was just so magical, but also perfectly paints this obsessive, all-consuming, devouring kind of love. I'm gonna do another little spoiler section here just to read a couple of the romantic quotes, so if you haven't read this, I would just skip to the end of the spoiler section. So this is at one point when Thomas kind of confronts Andrew and tries to see if they feel the same way. And so Thomas says, "You could cut me open and devour everything that I am. I would let you. I'd ask you to. Everything inside me is in ruins. For you." Stop. This next one is at like the complete end of the book, so if you haven't read this, do not listen to this. They didn't need two hearts. They could share Andrew's, even if it was a bruised and sorrowful thing. Their rib bones would twine together in a lattice to protect them from the worst of the world, and they would always be together. They should never be apart. But wait. They devoured each other in this forest. These boys so ravenous and defiant and tearful, they'd not known how to stop. The way Andrew loved Thomas was terrible and eternal, but he couldn't remember if he ever said that out loud. Remember, you love me. All my stories are about you. They will always be about you. Anyway, yeah, I don't know what's more romantic than literally rotting together and sharing one heart and being interlaced with each other's bones until the end of time. That's such a very Gomez and Morticia kind of love, and I love that for them. So anyway, that's spoilers and quotes done now. So for my final thoughts on this, I adored it. I loved this. I think this story is one that's going to stick with me for a really long time, and if you are also someone who enjoys a really dark, creepy, autumnal, haunting atmosphere and all-consuming queer love, I think you'll also love this. However, I do want to give a couple disclaimers for this. One, I would definitely check the content warnings for this, and I was surprised with how gross and grotesque it was considering it's YA. It's definitely not the most disgusting book ever by any means, but I would keep that in mind. And also, if you're someone who kind of likes a clear-cut ending that wraps everything up nicely and explains everything, this probably won't be for you. I would just keep those couple disclaimers in mind, but I highly recommend this, and I gave it 5 stars. All right, we had a slight time skip, so now we're going to talk about the next book that I read in July, which is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. Mochi is purring and playing with something in front of the tripod, so if you hear purring, that's him. So Legendborn follows 16-year-old Brie Matthews as she's taking some early college courses at this new university, and a few months before the story starts, Brie's mother is killed in a car accident and her family is shattered from this. Her father is struggling a lot, and obviously she's also distraught. She kind of creates this metaphorical wall in herself, and so she's kind of not really acting like herself because she's got this part of her just completely cordoned off. When her and her best friend Alice go to this college, they have a night before classes start where they go to like the cliff and there's a party at the cliff. I guess it's just some kind of a student ritual at this college, but so they go to the cliff and there's a big party, and while they're at the party, her and Alice get separated, and at one point Brie witnesses what seems to be a demon attack, but no one else sees the demon aside from her and a couple other students who, they are not just regular students and they're more than they appear to be because they start fighting this demon with weapons that they literally pull out of the air basically. After this demon attack, Brie and a couple of the witnesses are basically memory wiped by this guy Selwyn who's there, and after this like memory wipe they're told to leave, but Brie is able to kind of like break the memory wipe and restore her memory of the incident, and she remembers the demons and she remembers Selwyn and the other girl and all this stuff. After the whole like memory wipe thing and she gets her memories back, she goes back to the cliff and she overhears Selwyn and the other girl talking about the demon attack and why the demon was here and what's going on, and they drop a couple keywords that Brie is going to make a mental note of for later, including Legendborn. This incident is kind of the starting point for the story and leads to Brie investigating further into the Legendborn, and she wants to learn more about these demons and these weird Legendborn, and she also realizes throughout this process that this might have something to do with her mother's death and maybe it wasn't an accident after all. So that's kind of the foundation of the story, and what follows is a lot of world building and a lot of really dense info dumping, honestly. There's clearly a lot of thought and a lot of planning that went into this and to establishing this very very complex world building and the lore behind everything. I don't know if it was just a me problem, but I just found that the delivery of all of the world building and lore just felt very dense and very front loaded, I guess. It was like the first half of the book was very, very packed with information, and it made it kind of hard to get absorbed into the story for me. It's not that I don't love really deep detailed world building or very intricate lore. I do. I love like RPG games that have really intense lore. But I think what can really make or break a story is the delivery of that lore and the delivery of all of the information that you're giving the reader. I guess it just kind of prevented me from getting fully immersed into the story and wanting to root for the characters and wanting to see where the story would go. And that's probably just a me problem. I know a lot of people really, really loved this. I feel like a lot of time was occupied by these really heavy-handed lore drops, and not enough was really put into getting to know the characters better and developing them as individuals. Sometimes it just kind of felt like characters were a little bit of like cardboard cutouts, and I don't think a lot of that changed until almost the end of the book. This one's just a tough one to talk about because I don't want to tear down the book in any way. I don't think it was a bad book. I just don't think it was really a story that I was very immersed in or interested in. Something that I mentioned in my recent vlog was that I just also found kind of the plot twists by the end to be a little bit predictable, and I know that'll vary per reader. It wasn't super heavy-handed with the foreshadowing or anything by any means. That also just took my enjoyment down a notch a little bit because I got to the end of the book and I was like, okay, I could have told you that that was going to happen. So I guess I just had too many things that were kind of preventing me from fully enjoying this one, so I ended up giving it 3 stars, which I feel really bad about. But for me, a 3 is still like an okay rating. So for me, a 3 isn't really like a bad review necessarily, but then I do feel bad about it because I don't want to be mean to the book or harsh in any way. So anyway, that was Legendborn. Sorry, please don't hate me. The next book that I finished in July is Heartstopper Volume 4 by Alice Oseman. Since this is the 4th installment in a graphic novel series, I'm not going to go too in-depth on it, but at this point in Nick and Charlie's relationship, things have gotten a lot more serious, and they're spending more time together, and they're starting to kind of fall in love. And so they're at the point in their relationship where they want to say I love you to one another, but they don't really know how to say it, and it's just a very cute, wholesome, relatable story arc for them in this one, and we get to see a lot of them spending time together and them being adorable. I mean, you know, what's new. This one does get a little bit more heavy. I would say it's probably the heaviest so far, just because some of the subject matter that we get into. Just be warned that this one does talk about eating disorders and self-harm, and it doesn't go into detail at all. It's not graphic by any means. I think this one does a good job of addressing those topics in a very approachable way. I think that it talks about, you know, being vulnerable with the people that you love and confiding in them about the help that you need and asking for help, asking for resources, and utilizing those resources. I think for a lot of young teenagers who are going through a lot of these things, it would be really helpful to see it framed this way. I think the message in this one, especially by the end, was just very heartfelt, and you could feel that all the way throughout. It was very emotional. I gave this one 5 stars, again, in the way that I kind of have been giving 5 stars to Heartstopper. It's not like a 5-star novel that blows my mind or anything, but it's just a good story, and it's very well done, and it's heartfelt, so I have to give it credit for that, you know? The next book that I read in July is The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. All of the books that I've read this month are going towards Katie Colson's Sunrise on the Readathon, which is of course a Hunger Games readathon, so naturally this one had to be read this month. This one is technically a reread for me because I read it the first time when I was a teenager, but it's been a while since then. I didn't really remember all of it, so it was really nice to revisit this one, and it was very nostalgic. I've also seen the movies, of course, and I've seen those more recently than I had read the books, so that's kind of more what's fresh in my head. If you haven't heard of or read The Hunger Games by now, where have you been, first of all? To summarize the premise of The Hunger Games, it is a dystopian set in a seemingly distant future Earth. There has been some kind of crisis that has left the world in ruins, and from the former ruins of North America, the capital of Panem was established, and the 12 districts surrounding Panem. This series follows a girl named Katniss Everdeen, who is a resident of District 12. She has to forage and hunt in the woods surrounding the district, which is also illegal to do, but she has to feed her sister and her mother. Her father's not in the picture because he died in the mines when she was young, and so she's kind of been the provider for their family. This book starts on the day of an event called The Reaping, where the capital takes 2 children from each district and puts them into an arena to fight and kill each other, and this is called the Hunger Games. The games are held as a way to basically punish the people of the district districts for an uprising that was many years ago, and to also remind them of who is in power here. So on Reaping Day, the way that the tributes are chosen is that there's a bowl with slips of paper, and it has every name of every child in the district. On this particular Reaping Day, the girl's name that is polled is Primrose Everdeen, which is Katniss's sister. And so Katniss volunteers as tribute because she doesn't want her 12-year-old sister to go to the Hunger Games. The boy who is chosen is Peeta Mellark, who is a baker's son, and he and Katniss have a little bit of history because he once gave her bread and helped her basically to stay alive when they were children. And so this book just follows Peeta and Katniss as they travel to the capital for the games, and they prepare, and of course they fight in the games. Obviously, since I had read this before and I've seen the movies, I knew what was going to be happening at every point pretty much, aside from a couple things I had forgotten about. I think that this really surprisingly holds up reading it as an adult, and I deeply enjoyed my time reading this. I read it in like 2 or 3 sittings because I was so invested. I think that the commentary in this as well, especially on oppression, feels very relevant. I think this is a very well written cautionary tale, and I think a lot of dystopians tend to be cautionary tales, and I think that the dystopian genre is very important, and that's why we need to be having stories like this. And even though this is YA, I feel like it doesn't baby the reader at all. I think that as an adult reading this, I took away just as much, if not more, than when I read it when I was a teenager. I definitely enjoyed revisiting this book, and I'm excited to continue with the series. I gave this one 4.5 stars, and even though it was technically a reread, I don't remember what I would have rated it when I was a teenager, so that's why I'm rating it now. Hi, this is End of the Month Jess here now to tell you about the last few books that I finished in July. The next book that I read is Walking Practice by Dolki Min. This one was originally written in Korean and translated into English by Victoria Caudle, and so I read this one for the Sunrise on the Readathon bonus prompt, which was translated work. Walking Practice is a fairly short horror sci-fi novella, and it follows an alien who crash lands on Earth at some point before the story takes place, and you follow this alien as they are trying to blend into human society and trying to stay alive, which includes hunting humans for food. The alien is able to take on a human form, and though it takes a lot of effort and a lot of energy on their part, they do this to disguise themselves and hunt their prey. They have learned that the best way to secure food is to set up random appointments for hookups with humans. So they will shapeshift into whatever form the prey desires, and then they will go to these appointments and sleep with the victim, and then they will kill and butcher them. You know, as you do. So as you can tell, this book is pretty gross. It's very disgusting and full of body horror, and it will probably make you not want to eat meat for a while. It did for me. I found this to be such a captivating, unput-downable book, and I literally finished it in one night. I picked it up and read for a little while, and then I had to go eat, thankfully not meat, and then I came back right after and finished the rest of the story, and I was so laser-focused on this book that I actually gave myself a headache. This is a very experimental book, and that was, I think, one of the most captivating things about it, is that the way it is written and the narrative voice of the alien is so fascinating and so unique. And since this was originally written in Korean and translated to English, the translator had to do a lot of work to make sure that the tone and the message came across the same way and carries the same meaning that it did in Korean. And so this is also formatted very uniquely. There are different parts throughout the story where the text is written completely differently. The narrator has a different tone of speaking, and I thought that was really fascinating that when the alien is in its alien form, it speaks and writes a certain way, and when it's in its human form, it has a completely different way of speaking, and I think that that makes it even more interesting. It feels like you're having a split POV story, but it's one person. I think by far that the most interesting part of this story is the allegory for queerness within it. The alien is really representative and depicting a queer identity and the struggle to assimilate in a way, to fit in. Throughout the whole book, the alien has to mirror human behavior and mirror human appearances, and it describes the criteria to be an acceptable human in a very clinical way, which is very fitting because this is a completely foreign culture to the alien, and they are finding that they have to bend and manipulate and warp themselves literally to fit in. When the alien is back at home on their crashed spaceship, you can see the way that they literally unmask themselves and the relief that comes with slipping out of that performative shell that you put on around other people, and that relief that you feel when you can just relax and be yourself and be comfortable in your own skin. And then when they have to go out and hunt, they have to literally manipulate their body into a human form. And so they're explaining it as, you know, when they're putting on their human form, that if they want to appear feminine, they have to do this certain thing and do all of these certain behaviors, and they have to look a certain way. And when they're taking on a masculine form, they have to apply a different set of criteria. And so this is a really interesting and thorough look at gender expectations and the criteria that we have for what is feminine and what is masculine, or what's a woman and what's a man, and how it boils down to being a very reductive and unattainable level of standards. And the alien's narrative throughout all of this book is basically making you question that. It really makes you dissect and think about these social norms and gender expectations and why we have these artificial criteria. And that's why this is such an interesting allegory on queer identities, because to queer and gender nonconforming people, this is literally how it feels. It feels like you have to put on a second skin and force yourself to take a certain form to be acceptable or palatable to the world around you, when really ultimately the construct of gender expectations and what's acceptable presentation is all just made up bullshit anyway. And I think that the alien's inner monologue is really good at tearing that apart. It's also a kind of interesting exploration on why humans find themselves to be the superior life form versus all the other life forms on Earth, and why we find it's okay to kill and eat other creatures but not to kill and eat each other. And because the alien is literally hunting humans and butchering them and treating them like cuts of meat, the book again kind of wants you to draw the parallel between what the alien is doing with humans to what humans do with livestock and such. And I think that's again just such an interesting and thought-provoking point. There is one thing that I didn't really love and kind of didn't sit right with me about this story, and I will link Plant-Based Bride's video on this book because her video is how I even found out about walking practice. And after I had read the book, I went back and listened to the discussion and the spoilers about it. I think that her discussion on fat phobia in this was really well put, and I think she puts it into words better than I could, and so I will encourage you to watch that video. But to kind of summarize my own thoughts on that, I think that the way that the alien perceives and discusses people that are overweight is kind of very gross. And again, I think Elizabeth says something very similar in her video, but it's very hypocritical of the alien to be so deconstructive when it comes to gender or sexual norms, but then they turn around and pass judgment on or kind of tear down people based on their weight. Especially the terms that were being thrown around I didn't really love, and I think, or at least I hope, that on the author's part it was intentional, because maybe they wanted to draw a comparison between the alien and the way that humans perceive other humans. Maybe to critique the alien for being as superficial as they perceive humans to be regarding people's appearances or gender presentation. But if that's the case, I don't think that they made it clear enough about that, and I think that it would have lent itself better to somehow showing the flaws in the alien's logic and letting this be a discussion around hypocrisy, but I don't think it really went there. So that's my only kind of drawback with this. Overall, I found this to be a really twisty, very gross, very disgusting, very visceral look at humanity and gender and sex and the ethics of meat consumption, I suppose. The way that the story is written, the narrator just gets into your head and they worm their way in there, and I think that's exactly what they want. And now it's been like over a week since I finished it and I still can't get it out of my head, so I would say it was successful at what it set out to do. If any of this sounded interesting to you and you're morbidly curious, I would say pick it up, it's worth a shot. And I've heard that the audiobook is fantastic. I will say there are formatting choices that are made in this that I would really recommend having a physical or a digital copy to read while you listen. I think that would be the best way to absorb this story completely, and if I ever reread it, I will definitely do the audio and the physical at the same time. And lastly, just to wrap up my thoughts, I ended up giving this book 4 stars, so that was Walking Practice by Dolkimen. The next book that I finished is a manga called Skullface Bookseller Honda-san Volume 1. My discussion on this one will be super brief just because it's a manga, so it's very short and I don't really have a whole lot to say about it. This follows a bookseller who works at a bookstore, specifically in the manga section. It follows a series of episodic style day in the life of a bookseller. It's just a very silly sequence of events, and if you've worked in retail or you've worked at a bookstore, then it'll be very relatable to you. I think that the experiences with the customers were really funny, and it was just a humorous series of events, and I think my favorite thing was the art style, personally. The cover just has this really fun, vibrant look to it. The art and all the panels is really well done too, and I think that the expressions of all the characters are very, very comical. For example, this frame I really liked. But yeah, so this was just a very silly, goofy time, and I probably will continue the series. I didn't give this one a super high rating, but I think that it was funny, and I ended up giving this one 3 stars, mostly just because I found the writing to be a little clunky. The dialogue felt a little mechanical at times, and not really like humans talk. I still think that the art was really great, and I'll probably continue the series just because it's funny and because the art is really good. So that was Skullface Bookseller Honda-san. The last book that I finished this month is Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. I borrowed this one from the library, so I wanted to make sure I did my wrap-up before I return it. This one is a fairly short, it's only 220 something pages, contemporary literary horror, but I would say kind of light on the horror. I kind of expected more horror going into this, but I wasn't necessarily disappointed by the level of horror that I got. This story follows a married couple named Miri and Leah. Leah is a marine researcher or a marine biologist of some kind. At the start of the story, she's just returning from an expedition that was supposed to be 3 weeks, but it ended up being that she was gone for 6 months. The research center that Leah worked for was being very shady and dismissive about this expedition and not really telling Miri why it took 6 months. And as soon as Leah comes back, Miri starts noticing that she's not acting the same, she's not eating the same, and Miri finds herself in the situation where she's kind of become Leah's caretaker. So she's experiencing not only caretaker burnout, but she's also questioning what happened to the woman that she married. This story is definitely very slow-paced, and it kind of takes a long time to unravel what's going on, and there's a lot of loose ends that are never really fully answered. It's also a very deep and thoughtful exploration of marriage and the quiet resentment that builds when your partner changes over time or something happens to them and they come back not quite the same as they were. Miri loves Leah, and she wants to take care of her, and she wants to find out what happened, but she's also experiencing a lot of discomfort because Leah is seemingly shutting her out and not confiding in her, and she's not acting the same or speaking the same or even not remembering things and not being as affectionate or being present at all. And so despite her love for her wife, she's developing a little bit of this kind of silent contempt for her as well. She wants her wife back, but she also finds that she's just kind of retreated into herself and is kind of losing herself along the way as well. So there's that kind of emotional side of the story and the exploration of marriage. And then there's the mystery of the expedition and why Leah is acting the way that she is. And this is a split POV story, so it takes place between Miri and Leah's POVs. And through Leah's chapters, you kind of slowly get drip-fed the truth of what happened. I think for some people, this story might be too slow-paced or not give enough answers or be a little too rambling. I think I was in the perfect mood for it, and that really lent itself to how I felt about it. I ended up really enjoying my experience with this and really liking Julia's writing style, so I definitely want to read more from this author. I think that the themes in here are very emotional and thought-provoking and relatable. Because Miri had thought that Leah was dead for months, it talks about grief and how the grieving process is different when you don't have a body. You don't have anything to grieve. And then after Leah's return and her not really being the same person, it also discusses mourning when the person is right next to you. The mourning of a person that you thought you knew and loved. The kind of overarching theme throughout the story of change and transformation is evident all throughout, and I found myself tabbing a bunch of different moments that really emphasized that for me. I might have to take pictures of the quotes that I pointed out because I'm gonna have to take all these tabs out when I return it anyway. But overall, I really liked this one, and I found the story satisfying even though it's a little ambiguous at times. I think that I was just in the perfect mood for that, and I gave this 4 stars. And with that, that is everything that I read in July. And like I said, it was a really good reading month. It was very productive. I had a lot of favorites this month, and overall, I really enjoyed my time with all these books. I'm very proud of how many books that I read this month, and I had a really great time with Katie Colson's Readathon, so I look forward to participating in it next year. Obviously, it's too late to join the Readathon because it was the month of July, but I will link her channel, and if you want to catch up on her Readathon videos, you can find them all there. And if by some luck or witchcraft Katie is watching this video, which would be insane, thank you so much for hosting this Readathon. I had such a great time with it, and I'm really proud of how many books I read. I love the community that you've built on the Discord, and I'm really happy with the community that's over there and how much people were building each other up and supporting each other throughout the Readathon. And I also hosted my first live reading sprints because of the Readathon and the people from the Discord who came. It was such a lovely time, and I'm really proud that I did that. It was tough, overcoming my anxiety, but the community was so welcoming and so inviting that it made it feel so much more approachable. And that's just like another really happy milestone for this month. So overall, it was a really great month. month, and now I should probably stop yapping. So anyway, thank you for watching this video and thank you for hanging out with me. I hope that you enjoyed. If you did, please like, comment, and subscribe. It means a lot. I would love to hear what you read this month. If you made it to the end of this video and you don't know what to comment, why don't you drop a bow and arrow emoji in honor of the Hunger Games Readathon, and I will see you in the next one. Bye! This story was just so dark and creepy and twisty, and it had me on the edge of my seat my whole time. This story was just so dark and creepy and twisty, and it had me on the edge of the seat. What do you think, Mochi? Can you put the dumpster back down? Please leave. I borrowed this one physically. Obviously, it's in my fucking hand.